"I don't pay you to care, Ms. Reed. I pay you to be a shadow. And shadows are useful, Mr. Carter. They go where the light can't." Ben Carter thought he had hired just another nanny, a disposable shield for the only two things he loved in this violent world. He was wrong. He didn't hire a servant, he hired a savior. But in a world built on betrayal, the price of loyalty is usually blood. Tonight, that debt comes due. Welcome to a story of deception, sacrifice, and a love that begins only when the bullets start flying. This is She Took a Bullet for His Twins. The silence in the penthouse wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like the air before an explosion. Ben Carter sat behind a desk made of imported mahogany that cost more than most people earned in a decade. He wasn't looking at the ledger open in front of him. He was watching the monitor. On the black and white screen, a woman moved with an economy of motion that unsettled him. Allison Reed. She was folding clothes in the nursery, her movements precise, almost military. No wasted energy, no humming, no sentimentality. "She's too perfect, Luke," Ben muttered, his voice a low rumble. Luke Adams, his head of security and oldest friend, leaned against the doorframe, cleaning his fingernails with a small tactical knife. "She was vetted, Ben. Clean record, nursing degree from state. References from 2 senators. She's boring. That's what you wanted. Boring is safe." "In my life, boring is usually a cover," Ben replied, tapping a pen against the desk. Ben Carter wasn't just a businessman. He was the architect of the city's underground logistics. Nothing moved through the ports without his nod. That kind of power made him a king, but it also made his 5-year-old twins, Caleb and Emily, high-value targets. Since his wife died, a memory he kept locked in a vault in the back of his mind. He had gone through 6 nannies in 2 years. They either quit from fear or were fired for incompetence. Allison was different. She had been there 3 months. She never flinched when his men walked in with blood on their collars. She never asked questions. She just protected the children. On the screen, little Caleb woke up, rubbing his eyes. Allison didn't coo or coddle. She knelt immediately to his eye level, checked his forehead, and whispered something that made the boy nod solemnly. What did she tell him? Ben wondered aloud. "Probably to go back to sleep before the bogeyman comes," Luke joked. Ben stood up, adjusting his cufflinks. "I'm going up." The hallway was a gallery of shadows. Ben moved silently, a habit learned from years of surviving assassination attempts. When he reached the nursery door, he didn't enter. He listened. "Fear is a signal, Caleb." Allison's voice came through the crack in the door. It wasn't the soft sing-song voice of a caregiver. It was steady, firm. "It tells you to pay attention. You don't hide from it. You use it." "Like Daddy?" Caleb's small voice asked. "Your father uses anger. That's different. Anger burns out. Focus lasts forever." Ben pushed the door open. The sudden movement didn't make Allison jump. She simply stood up, smoothing her skirt, placing her body subtly between him and the bed. It was a micro-movement, something an untrained eye would miss, but Ben saw it. She was blocking his line of sight to his own son. "Philosophy at 2 a.m., Ms. Reed?" Ben asked, his eyes cold. "Nightmares, Mr. Carter," Allison replied, her face a mask of professional indifference. "He dreamt someone was in the closet, and you told him to use his fear? Better than telling him monsters aren't real. We both know that would be a lie." Ben stepped closer. He towered over her, radiating the kind of menace that made hardened criminals look at the floor. Allison held his gaze. Her eyes were a strange shade of grey, flat and unreadable. "I pay you to feed them and keep them clean," Ben said softly. "I don't pay you to train them." "You pay me to keep them safe," she corrected him. "A terrified child is a loud child. Loud children get hurt." Ben stared at her. For a second, he felt a flicker of something. Suspicion, intrigue, maybe respect. He crushed it immediately. "Check the perimeter alarms again," he ordered, turning his back on her, "and stay away from the windows." He walked out, feeling her eyes on his back like a physical weight. Downstairs, the atmosphere shifted. Sean Walker was waiting in the library. Sean was the erratic son of the rival family, a man who wore expensive suits but had the impulse control of a rabid dog. He was sitting in Ben's chair, feet on the desk. "Get your feet down, Sean," Ben said, entering the room. "You're touchy tonight, Carter," Sean laughed, swinging his legs down. "Just came to deliver the invite. The Unity Gala. The commission insists you attend, and they want the heirs there too. The twins stay here," Ben stated. "No can do," Sean grinned, his teeth too white. "It's a show of faith, proof that we're all one big happy family. You leave the kids at home, people think you're planning a war. You bring them, it shows trust." "I don't trust you." "That's why you have to bring them." Sean stood up, dusting off his jacket. "Tomorrow night, the Grand Hall. Don't be late. Oh, and bring that pretty nanny. I might want to hire her after you're retired." Sean walked out, bumping shoulders with Luke on the way. Luke closed the door and looked at Ben. "It's a trap," Luke said. "Obviously," Ben replied. He poured himself a whiskey, ignoring the glass and drinking straight from the bottle. "But if I don't go, I look weak. If I look weak, the Turner faction moves on the docks. So we take the kids into a kill box." "No," Ben slammed the bottle down. "We turn the kill box into a fortress. Double the detail. You stick to me. Put Nick Foster on the perimeter and tell Allison she's coming." "She's a civilian, Ben." "She's a shield," Ben said, his voice devoid of emotion. "If things go south, no one looks at the help. She gets them out while we handle the trash. If she panics, well, that's what she's paid for." Upstairs, Allison Reed wasn't sleeping. She was in her bathroom, running the water to mask the sound. She pulled a small encrypted burner phone from a hollowed-out heel of her shoe. She typed a single message. "The asset is moving to the open. Tomorrow. Stand by." She flushed the phone's memory, hid it again, and looked in the mirror. The face looking back wasn't the face of a nanny. It was the face of a woman who had seen cities burn and had walked away with ash on her skin. Ben Carter thought she was an angel of domesticity. He had no idea she was the angel of death. The preparation for the Unity Gala was a military operation disguised as a dress rehearsal. The penthouse was filled with the static of radios and the metallic click of weapons being checked. Ben stood in the center of the living room, adjusting his holster beneath a tuxedo jacket that cost more than a luxury car. He looked like a prince of darkness, handsome, sharp, and lethal. But his eyes were darting everywhere, checking exits, checking angles. "Where are they?" he snapped. The elevator doors opened. Allison stepped out, holding the hands of the twins. Usually, Ben ignored Allison's appearance. To him, she was furniture. But tonight, the air left his lungs for a fraction of a second. She wasn't wearing the standard grey uniform. She wore a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk. It was modest, high-necked and long-sleeved, but the way it moved over her frame suggested a hidden strength. Her hair, usually pulled back in a severe bun, was loose, framing her face. But it was her eyes that caught him. They were scanning the room, counting his men, checking the sightlines. "You look nice, Ms. Reed," Luke Adams said, a lecherous grin spreading across his face. "Keep your eyes on the perimeter, Mr. Adams," she replied, her voice cool. She looked at Ben. "I've packed the emergency bag, medical supplies, sugar tablets for Caleb, change of shoes." "Shoes?" Ben asked, frowning. "You can't run in heels," she said simply, lifting the hem of her dress an inch to reveal she was wearing practical, rubber-soled flats disguised with decorative crystals. Ben nodded, a grudging approval settling in his gut. "Good. The plan is simple. You stay attached to the kids. If I say winter, you take them to the south exit. Don't wait for me. Don't look back. You get them in the car and you drive until the gas runs out." "Understood," she said. The convoy to the Grand Hall was tense. Ben rode in the lead car with Luke. Alison and the twins were in the armoured SUV behind them, flanked by Evan Moore, the family lawyer who doubled as a fixer. "You seem calm," Evan noted, tapping on his tablet. "Panic is a waste of oxygen," Alison said, watching the streetlights blur past. She was playing a game with the twins, identifying colours of passing cars to keep them distracted. Her hand, however, was resting near the door handle, her muscles coiled. The grand hall was a cavern of marble and gold. The air smelled of expensive perfume and suppressed violence. The heads of the 5 families were there. The tension was palpable. It wasn't a party. It was a standoff with hors d'oeuvres. Ben entered, his presence parting the crowd. He kept the twins close, his hand resting on Caleb's shoulder. Alison trailed a step behind, carrying Emily. She looked like the perfect subservient employee, but her mind was racing. 4 exits, 2 blocked by waiters who stand too stiffly. West balcony has a sniper line of sight. Kitchen access is undefended. She catalogued threats faster than a computer. She noticed things Ben missed. She saw that the waiters were wearing earpieces that were slightly too bulky, military grade, not event staff issue. She saw that Sean Walker wasn't drinking. Sean always drank. "Mr. Carter," a voice dripped with false honey. It was Owen Parker, the eldest of the Dons. He was wheelchair-bound, but more dangerous than a viper. "You brought the cubs." "They need to see the zoo, Owen," Ben replied, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Lovely creatures," Owen said, reaching out a withered hand to touch Emily's cheek. Alison shifted, a subtle movement, barely a pivot, but it put her hip between Owen's hand and the child. "She has a cold, Mr. Parker," Alison lied smoothly. "I wouldn't want you to catch it. At your age, immune systems can be fragile." Ben stiffened. Insulting a Don was a death sentence. Owen's hand froze. He looked up at Alison, his eyes narrowing. Then he let out a dry, rasping laugh. "Protective. Good. Ben, this one has teeth." "She's leaving," Ben said, gripping Alison's elbow tightly. "Go to the safe zone. Now." "Not yet," Alison whispered, leaning in close to Ben. The intimacy of the gesture made onlookers think it was a romantic whisper, but her words were tactical. "Look at the band. The drummer isn't playing. He's watching the clock. And the waiters. Look at their shoes." Ben frowned, glancing toward the bar. The waiters were wearing heavy, treaded work boots under their slacks. Not dress shoes. Tactical footwear. "Damn it," Ben hissed. He tapped his earpiece. "Luke, we have a problem. Pull the car around, we're leaving." "Copy that, boss," Luke's voice crackled in his ear. "I'm at the north entrance. Come to me." "No," Alison said, her voice sharp. "Not north. North is a choke point." Ben really looked at her for the first time. "How do you know that?" "Geometry," she said. "If they want to hit you, they'll funnel you north. We go through the kitchen." Ben hesitated. Trusting the nanny over his head of security was insanity, but the look in her eyes wasn't fear, it was certainty. "Nick," Ben signaled Nick Foster, who was hovering near the buffet. "Take the north hall, draw fire. We're going kitchen." "On it," Nick nodded, pulling a suppressed pistol from his jacket without hesitation. Suddenly the lights flickered. The music stopped. The drummer dropped his sticks and reached into his bass drum. "Down!" Alison screamed. She didn't wait for Ben. She grabbed both twins, shoving them under a heavy oak table just as the first chandelier shattered, raining glass onto the screaming crowd. Chaos wasn't a pit. It was a ladder, and the shooters were climbing it fast. The ballroom erupted into a deafening cacophony of gunfire and screams. The waiters had drawn submachine guns from beneath their trays. Ben flipped a table, creating a barrier. He pulled his weapon, a custom .45, and fired 2 precise shots. 2 attackers dropped. He turned to grab the twins, but they were already moving. Alison had them. She wasn't dragging them. She was guiding them low to the ground, moving in a crouch that shielded their small bodies with her own. She moved with a fluidity that shocked Ben. She checked corners. She anticipated ricochets. "Kitchen!" Ben roared, covering their retreat. They burst through the swinging doors into the stainless steel labyrinth of the kitchen. Steam hissed from overturned pots. Cooks were cowering in the pantry. "Exit is clear," Alison announced, kicking a heavy door open. She didn't look at Ben. "Go left. The service elevator goes to the sub-basement. The garage is a trap." "My car is in the garage," Ben argued, reloading as they ran. "And so are the explosives," Alison countered. "Trust me." Ben didn't have a choice. He followed the woman in the blue dress, who was currently dismantling his entire understanding of her existence. They reached the service elevator. Alison punched the button, then smashed the panel with her elbow to prevent anyone from calling it back up. The descent was agonizingly slow. The twins were crying now, the shock wearing off. "It's okay," Alison said, her voice dropping instantly into that calm, soothing register she used for nightmares. She wiped a smudge of soot from Leo's face. "We're playing a game, remember? Silent ninjas." Leo nodded, biting his lip to stop the tears. The doors opened to the sub-basement. Damp concrete, dim lighting, the hum of the HVAC systems. It was a maze of pillars and parked delivery trucks. "We need a vehicle," Ben said, scanning the area. "There," Alison pointed to a nondescript catering van. "Keys will be in the ignition. Delivery drivers are lazy." They moved toward the van. Ben felt a surge of relief. They were going to make it. He reached for the handle of the van. "Ben, wait," Alison said, stopping abruptly. She pushed the twins behind a concrete pillar. "What?" Ben spun around. "It's too quiet," she whispered. From the shadows, a slow clap echoed. Luke Adams stepped out from behind a parked sedan. He wasn't holding his gun at the ready. He was holding it loosely, pointed at the ground. Behind him stood Sean Walker and 3 heavy hitters. "You always were smart, Ben," Luke said, a sad smile on his face. "But you have terrible taste in staff." Ben froze. The betrayal hit him harder than a bullet. "Luke, why?" "Money, power, the usual," Luke shrugged. "Sean made an offer. The Turner family wants the territory. I want to retire without looking over my shoulder. Nothing personal, brother." "You were at my wedding," Ben growled, stepping in front of the pillar where Alison and the twins were hiding. "And I'll be at your funeral." Sean Walker laughed, raising a shotgun. "Cut the chatter. End it." "No witnesses," Luke commanded, raising his pistol. He aimed not at Ben, but at the pillar, at the children. Time seemed to warp. Ben raised his gun, but he was off balance, too slow. He saw Luke's finger tighten on the trigger. He saw the muzzle flash. He expected to hear the children scream. Instead, he saw blue silk blur. Alison didn't push the children. She didn't shout. She launched herself from the cover of the pillar, her body fully extended in the air, a human wall between the ballistic trajectory and the twins. Thud, thud, 2 sounds, meat and bone. Alison hit the ground hard, rolling once, but she didn't stay down. She came up on one knee, gasping. A crimson stain was blossoming rapidly on her shoulder and her side, turning the midnight blue dress black. But she wasn't empty-handed. In her hand was a weapon Ben hadn't seen her draw, a compact, suppressed pistol she must have pulled from a thigh holster beneath the dress. Before Luke could process that the nanny was still moving, Alison fired. "Phut! Phut! Phut! 3 shots! 3 seconds!" The 2 men behind Sean dropped, holes in their foreheads. Sean screamed as a bullet shattered his kneecap. Luke scrambled back, shocked. "What the hell?" Alison didn't answer. She couldn't. She slumped against the tire of the van, the gun slipping from her fingers. The blood was coming too fast. Ben snapped out of his trance. The rage that exploded in him was blinding. He raised his .45 and unloaded the entire clip at Luke's position. forcing the traitor to dive behind a dumpster. "Get in the van!" Ben screamed at the twins, grabbing them and throwing them into the open sliding door. He ran to Allison. She was pale, her breath coming in ragged, wet gasps. He scooped her up. She was lighter than he expected, but her skin was burning hot. "Leave me!" she wheezed, blood bubbling past her lips. "Cover! The rear!" "Shut up!" Ben roared, throwing her into the back of the van with the terrified children. He jumped into the driver's seat, hot-wired the ignition with trembling hands, thank God for his misspent youth, and slammed the accelerator. The van screeched out of the sub-basement, tearing through the metal gate and out into the cool night air. Ben drove like a madman, weaving through traffic, putting miles between them and the slaughter. Only when he was sure they weren't being followed did he glance in the rearview mirror. The twins were huddled over Allison. Caleb was pressing his small hands against her side, trying to stop the red flow, just like he'd seen in movies. "Is she sleeping, Daddy?" Emily cried. "She won't wake up." Ben pulled over under a bridge in the industrial district. He scrambled into the back. Allison's eyes were fluttering. She looked at him, her gaze unfocused. The grey eyes were losing their steel. "Who are you?" Ben whispered, ripping the hem of her expensive dress to make a tourniquet. "Who are you, really?" Allison coughed, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. Her bloody hand left a mark on his white shirt right over his heart. "I'm the insurance," she whispered. Her head lolled back. Ben checked her pulse. It was faint, thready, like a moth trapped in a jar. He looked at the gun she had dropped. It was a military-grade Sig Sauer, modified for covert ops. The serial number had been filed off professionally. He looked at his children, alive because of this stranger. He looked at the woman bleeding out on the floor of a dirty catering van. He realized then that he didn't know anything. He didn't know her past. He didn't know her secrets. He only knew that the angel he hired was a killer, and if she died tonight, a part of him would die with her. "Hold on, Allison," Ben commanded, his voice breaking. "That's an order." He jumped back into the front seat. He wasn't driving to the hospital. The hospitals were watched. He was driving to the only person he could trust now, a disgraced combat medic who lived off the grid. The night was far from over, and Ben Carter was done playing defense. The hospital was a basement beneath a failing 24-hour laundromat in the warehouse district. It smelled of bleach, old copper pipes, and antiseptic. It was the domain of Kathy, a woman who had been a top trauma surgeon until a bottle of vodka and a trembling hand during a senator's bypass surgery cost her everything. Now she stitched up bad men for cash. Ben kicked the door open, carrying Allison's limp body like a sacred offering. "Kathy!" Ben roared, his voice echoing off the damp concrete walls. "I need you!" Kathy emerged from the back room, wiping grease from her hands. She took one look at the blood-soaking Ben's shirt, then at the pale woman in his arms, and her expression shifted from annoyance to professional focus. "Table!" Kathy barked, pointing to a steel slab under a halo of bright LED lights. "Get the kids out of the room." Ben laid Allison down. She was dangerously still. He turned to the twins. Caleb and Emily were huddled by the door, their eyes wide, reflecting the harsh lights. They looked like porcelain dolls cracked by a hammer. "Go with Kathy's assistant," Ben ordered, his voice gentler than he felt. "There's a TV in the break room. Watch cartoons. Do not come out until I say so." Kathy's assistant, a mute giant named Tiny, gently ushered the terrified children away. The moment the door clicked shut, Kathy ripped open Allison's dress, exposing the damage. "Through and through on the shoulder," Kathy muttered, probing the wound with gloved fingers. "Clean exit. But the side. The bullet is lodged near the liver. She's bleeding internally, Ben." "Who is she?" "The nanny," Ben said, pacing the small room like a caged tiger. Kathy paused, looking up with a raised eyebrow. "The nanny? She's wearing a tactical holster, Ben. And look at this." Kathy pointed to a series of faint white scars crisscrossing Allison's ribcage. These are old knife wounds. And that burn mark? That's from a car battery. This woman isn't a nanny. She's a survivor of something worse than you. Just fix her, Ben growled. She took those bullets for the twins. Then she's either a saint or a fool, Kathy said, grabbing a scalpel. Get out. I can't work with you breathing down my neck. Ben left the operating room, collapsing onto a plastic chair in the hallway. He pulled his phone out. It was dead. He smashed it against the wall in frustration. Luke Adams, his brother, in arms. The man who had stood beside him at his wife's grave. The betrayal tasted like ash in his mouth. He needed answers. While Kathy worked, Ben went to the pile of Allison's bloody clothes. He searched the pockets. Nothing. He checked the shoes. He found the hollow heel, but the burner phone was gone, likely lost in the van. But inside the lining of the dress, he felt something rigid. He ripped the silk. A small black data chip fell into his palm. He went to the ancient computer in the laundromat's office and plugged it in. It was encrypted heavily, but Ben knew a few tricks. He bypassed the initial firewall. A single file opened. It wasn't a dossier on him. It was a dossier on Luke. Photos of Luke meeting with the Turner family. Bank transfers to offshore accounts. Dates, times, locations. Allison hadn't just been watching the kids. She had been building a case against his head of security. "Who are you?" Ben whispered to the screen. 3 hours later, Kathy came out. She looked exhausted, wiping blood from her forehead. "She's alive," Kathy said, lighting a cigarette. "Tough as nails, that one. She woke up halfway through the extraction, didn't scream, just told me to avoid the intercostal nerve." Ben didn't wait. He pushed past Kathy into the recovery room. Allison was lying on the cot, an IV drip hooked to her arm. Her skin was the color of paper, but her eyes were open. They locked onto Ben immediately. "You should be resting," Ben said, standing at the foot of the bed. "We need to move," Allison rasped. Her voice was weak, stripped of its usual strength. "Luke knows about this place. It was in the contingency files." "How do you know my contingency files?" Ben asked, holding up the data chip. "And how long have you known Luke was a rat?" Allison closed her eyes for a moment, gathering strength. "I was sent here to kill you, Ben." The silence that followed was deafening. Ben's hand drifted toward his gun. 6 months ago, Allison continued, her eyes still closed, a contract came through the dark web. High value. You were the target. The client was the Turner family. So you took the job. "I took the job to get close," she said, opening her eyes. "But on day 2, I saw you with the twins. You weren't the monster the dossier described. You were a father trying to keep his cubs dry in a hurricane. I decided to vet the contract. That's when I found the leaks. Luke wasn't just working with the Turners. He was orchestrating the war to take your empire. So you became my nanny to, what? Save me?" "To decide," she said simply. "If you were guilty, I would have put a bullet in your coffee. If you were innocent, I'd find the real threat. But then..." She looked toward the door where the kids were. "Then I met them, and the mission changed." Ben stared at her. He should kill her. She was a hired gun, a deception wrapped in a lullaby. But he remembered the blue blur. He remembered her body flying through the air. "You're fired," Ben said coldly. Allison let out a dry, pained chuckle. "Severance package?" "You live," Ben said. "That's the package. Once you can walk, you're gone." "You can't handle Luke alone," she countered, trying to sit up and wincing. "He knows your playbook because he wrote half of it. You need a variable he can't predict." "And that's you?" "I'm the ghost in the machine, Ben. I don't exist. Luke thinks I'm just a dead nanny. Let's keep it that way." The city thought Ben Carter was running. The rumors on the street were that he had fled to Mexico or that he was dead in a ditch. The Turner family was already moving trucks through his territory, celebrating their victory. They were wrong. Ben wasn't running. He was hunting. 2 nights later, while Alison was still too weak to stand without shaking, Ben left the safe house. He wore black fatigues and a balaclava. He didn't take a team. He didn't want witnesses. He drove a stolen sedan to the West End docks, the heart of the Turner operation. Sean Walker was there, overseeing a shipment of weapons. Sean was on crutches, his kneecap shattered by Alison's bullet, screaming at his men to move faster. "Load it up!" Sean yelled, waving his cane. "Carter is history! This is our city now!" Ben watched from the top of a shipping container. He held a detonator in his hand. He had spent the last hour rigging the perimeter with C4 he'd borrowed from Kathy's stockpile. He pressed the button. The explosion wasn't designed to kill. It was designed to terrify. The main gate erupted in a fireball, flipping a truck and sending the guards scrambling. The lights in the yard cut out as the power grid blew. Panic. Pure, unadulterated panic. Ben dropped down into the chaos. He moved like a wraith. A guard raised a rifle. Ben broke his arm before he could pull the trigger. Another tried to run. Ben swept his legs and knocked him unconscious with the butt of his pistol. He wasn't killing them. Dead men tell no tales. He wanted them to tell a story. He wanted them to tell Luke Adams that the devil was back. He found Sean Walker cowering behind a crate of AK-47s. Sean raised his pistol, his hand shaking uncontrollably. Stay back," Sean screamed. "I have men. I have an army." Ben stepped into the moonlight. He didn't raise his gun. He walked straight at Sean. Sean fired. The bullet sparked off the concrete inches from Ben's boot. Ben didn't flinch. He grabbed the gun barrel, twisted it from Sean's grip, and backhanded him across the face. Sean fell, whimpering, clutching his bad knee. "Please," Sean begged. "Luke made me do it. He said you were soft." Ben crouched down, grabbing Sean by the lapels of his expensive Italian suit. "You tell Luke something for me. Anything, anything." "Tell him his shadow is coming," Ben whispered. "Tell him nowhere is safe. Not his bed, not his car, not his bank." Ben stood up. He pulled a pin from a flashbang grenade and dropped it in Sean's lap. "Run," Ben said. He walked away as Sean screamed, scrambling backward. The flashbang detonated, a non-lethal burst of light and sound that left Sean deaf and blind for the next hour. Ben melted back into the night. He had sent the message. But when he returned to the safe house, the adrenaline crashed, leaving him hollow. He walked into the small living area. It was 3 a.m. He expected silence. Instead, he found Alison sitting on the floor, propped up against the sofa. She was pale, sweating, her bandages seeping a little blood. In front of her sat Caleb and Emily. Alison held a disassembled Glock 19 in her lap. She was demonstrating how to reassemble the slide. "And then you click it back," Alison said softly. "Do you see? It's just a puzzle. If you treat it like a toy, it bites. If you treat it like a tool, it protects." "Alison!" Ben barked. The twins jumped. Alison didn't flinch. She slowly placed the gun on the floor and looked up. "What are you doing?" Ben demanded, storming over. "They are 5 years old." "They are targets," Alison said, her voice steady despite her pain. "I found Caleb trying to sharpen a toothbrush on the concrete earlier. He's scared, Ben. He feels helpless. You can't protect them every second. Giving them knowledge gives them control." "You're teaching my children to use a gun?" "I'm teaching them gun safety," she corrected. "And I'm teaching them not to freeze. Freezing kills." Ben looked at Caleb. The boy wasn't crying. He looked determined. "She's right, Daddy," Caleb said, his voice small but firm. "I don't want to be scared anymore." Ben felt his anger deflate, replaced by a crushing sadness. His world had infected them. There was no going back to bedtime stories and innocent dreams. He sat down on the floor next to them, exhausted. He looked at Alison. She looked like death warmed over, but she was still fighting for his family. "Did you find Sean?" she asked. "He got the message," Ben said. He reached out, hesitating, then rested his hand on hers for a brief second. Her skin was fever hot. "You should be in bed." "I sleep when the perimeter is secure," she muttered, her eyelids drooping. "I'll take the watch," Ben said softly. "Rest, ghost." It was the first time he had used a nickname. A faint smile touched Alison's lips before she finally let the exhaustion take her. Recovery was a luxury they couldn't afford. 3 days after the surgery, Alison was walking. It wasn't a graceful walk, it was a stiff, pained shuffle, but she refused the wheelchair. They had moved from the laundromat to a safe house Evan Moore, the lawyer, had set up years ago. It was a cabin in the woods, off the grid, or so they thought. Ben was chopping wood outside, a physical release for the tension coiling in his chest. Alison was on the porch watching the tree line with binoculars. "You're staring at that pine tree like it insulted you," Ben said, driving the axe into a log. "The birds aren't nesting," Alison said, lowering the glasses. "Something disturbed them on the east ridge." "Could be a deer. Could be a sniper team," she countered. Ben walked up the steps, wiping sweat from his brow. The tension between them had shifted from hostility to a strange, synchronized partnership. They were two soldiers in a foxhole. "I checked the accounts this morning," Ben said, grabbing a bottle of water. "Luke is draining the reserves. He's not trying to run the business. He's trying to liquidate it. He's cashing out." "He's not the boss," Alison said, frowning. "Liquidating a syndicate takes authorization from the commission. Luke doesn't have that rank. Someone is pulling his strings." "The Turners?" "Bigger," Alison said. "The Turners are thugs. This is corporate. This is government level." Suddenly, a red laser dot appeared on Ben's chest. Alison didn't scream. She didn't shout. She tackled him. The crack of a high-powered rifle echoed through the valley. The wood pillar where Ben had been standing exploded into splinters. "Inside!" Alison yelled, dragging Ben through the door. They crashed onto the floor of the cabin. A second shot punched through the window, shattering the vase on the table. "Kids!" Ben scrambled toward the back bedroom. Alison was already moving. She ignored the tearing pain in her side. She kicked the bedroom table over, creating a barricade. "Get them to the cellar. I'll suppress." "You can't shoot with that wound," Ben yelled, grabbing the twins who were screaming. "Go!" she roared, racking the slide of an assault rifle she had stashed under the sofa. Alison crawled to the window. She took a breath, centered herself, and popped up. She saw the glint of the scope on the ridge, 300 yards out. Wind from the west. Drop is negligible. She fired. Short, controlled bursts. She wasn't aiming to kill, she was aiming to keep their heads down. Ben threw the trapdoor open in the pantry. "Get down there! Lock it from the inside!" "Daddy!" Emily clung to his leg. "I'll come back for you, I promise." He kissed her forehead and forced them down. Ben grabbed his own rifle and joined Alison at the window. The cabin was turning into Swiss cheese. Bullets were tearing through the thin wooden walls. "They have us pinned," Ben yelled over the noise. "We can't hold this." "We don't need to hold it," Alison grit her teeth. "Changing magazines." "We need to burn it." "What?" "The propane tank." She pointed to the large white tank on the side of the house near where the attackers were flanking. "If we blow it, the confusion gives us a window to the SUV." "That's suicide," Ben said. "It's distraction," she corrected. "But I can't make the shot from here. The angle is wrong." "I'll do it," Ben said. "No." Alison grabbed his arm. Her grey eyes were fierce, burning with something that looked terrifyingly like love. "You drive, you get them out. I'm the expendable asset, remember?" "Not anymore," Ben said. He grabbed her face and kissed her. It wasn't a soft kiss. It was hard, desperate, a promise and a goodbye all at once. He tasted blood and gunpowder. He pulled back. Alison looked stunned. "Cover me," Ben ordered. Before she could argue, Ben sprinted out the back door. The gunfire intensified. Bullets kicked up dirt around his feet. He dove behind the woodpile. He was exposed. Alison leaned out of the window, ignoring her own safety. She unleashed a torrent of fire. forcing the shooters on the ridge to duck. "Now, Ben!" she screamed. Ben raised his rifle. He aimed at the valve of the propane tank. 1 breath. 2 breaths. He pulled the trigger. The world turned white. The explosion shook the ground, a massive ball of fire consuming the east side of the yard and the approaching flankers. Ben scrambled back to the SUV parked in the rear. Allison was already there, limping out the back door with the twins, who she had retrieved from the cellar the moment the explosion hit. They piled into the car. Ben floored it, the tires spinning in the mud before gripping. They tore down the dirt road, the burning cabin reflecting in the rearview mirror. "Is everyone okay?" Ben shouted, his heart hammering against his ribs. "We're okay," Allison said from the back seat. She was clutching her side, fresh blood soaking her shirt, but she was smiling, a real smile. "That was awesome," Caleb whispered, his eyes wide. Ben laughed. It was a hysterical, jagged sound. "Where are we going?" Emily asked. "To the city," Ben said, his eyes hardening as he looked at the road ahead. "We're done hiding. We know who the enemy is now." "We do?" Allison asked. "Yeah," Ben said. "When I was outside, I saw the patch on one of the shooters' tactical vests. It wasn't Turner. It wasn't police." "What was it?" "It was a Blackwater mercenary group," Ben said grimly, "which means you were right. This is corporate, and the only person with the money to hire them and is the chairman of the commission," Allison finished. "Owen Parker, the old man in the wheelchair." Ben nodded. "The gala wasn't a hit on me. It was a cleansing. Owen wants to wipe the board clean and install a puppet. He used Luke to do it. Then we cut the strings," Allison said, checking the magazine of her rifle. "We go to the source." Ben looked at her in the mirror. She was battered, bleeding, and beautiful. "We go to war," Ben agreed. The road ahead was dark, but for the first time in years, Ben wasn't alone. He had a partner. He had a ghost. Owen Parker didn't live in a house. He lived in a fortress disguised as a private hospital. The Parker Institute for Geriatric Care was a gleaming steel tower in the center of the city. The top 3 floors were his personal fiefdom, guarded by a private army that made the police force look like mall cops. Ben Carter sat in the driver's seat of a stolen ambulance, checking his watch. It was 2 a.m. The city was asleep, but the lights in the tower were blazing. "You look ridiculous," Allison said from the passenger seat. Ben glanced at his reflection in the rearview mirror. He was wearing a paramedic's uniform that was 2 sizes too small. "I look like a professional," he grunted. "You, on the other hand, look terrifying." Allison was in the back, checking her gear. She wore black tactical gear, her face painted with camouflage grease. The wound in her side was bound tight with duct tape and painkillers. She looked less like a nanny and more like a Valkyrie ready for war. "The shift change is in 3 minutes, Allison said, ignoring his comment. "We have a 10-second window when the thermal cameras reset. If we miss it, the automated turrets in the lobby will turn us into confetti." "No pressure," Ben muttered. The plan was insane. It was suicide, but it was the only play they had. They couldn't fight an army, so they had to cut the head off the snake. "Luke will be there," Ben said, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. "He will," Allison agreed. "Do not hesitate, Ben. He made his choice." "I know." The digital clock on the dashboard hit 2:03 a.m. "Go!" Allison commanded. Ben slammed the accelerator. The ambulance screamed toward the service entrance, lights flashing. He smashed through the barrier arm, drifting the heavy vehicle into the loading bay. "Camera cycle, now!" Allison shouted. She kicked the back doors open and sprinted toward the service elevator. Ben followed, swiping a keycard he had lifted from a bribed orderly 2 hours ago. The light turned green. They were in. The elevator ride to the 40th floor was silent. Ben checked his weapon, a silenced USP .45. Allison held a pair of karambit knives. Gunfire would trigger the internal lockdown too early. The doors opened. 2 guards stood by the nurse's station. Before they could reach for their radios, Allison was a blur of motion. She closed the distance in silence, her movements fluid and brutal. A sweep of the leg, a strike to the throat. Both men dropped without a sound. "Clear," she whispered, dragging the bodies behind the desk. "You enjoy this too much," Ben noted, stepping over a fallen guard. "It's just work," she said, though her eyes were bright with adrenaline. "Parker is in the solarium, East Wing." They moved through the pristine white corridors. The walls were lined with expensive art, a stark contrast to the violence walking the halls. They reached the double mahogany doors of the solarium. Ben reached for the handle, but Allison stopped him. She pointed to a tripwire barely visible against the marble floor. "Claymore," she mouthed. Ben stepped back, sweat beading on his forehead. "He mined his own bedroom?" "Paranoia is a powerful architect," she whispered. She pulled a small toolkit from her belt, disarming the explosive with steady hands despite her injury. She nodded. Ben kicked the doors open. They expected guards. They expected a firefight. Instead, they found a dinner party. Owen Parker sat at the head of a long table, hooked up to an oxygen tank. Beside him sat Luke Adams, looking impeccable in a tuxedo, and around them stood a dozen heavily armed mercenaries. "Right on time," Owen wheezed, smiling through his mask. "Please, Mr. Carter, Miss Reed, have a seat. The soup is still warm." Ben didn't sit. He kept his gun leveled at Luke's chest. "I'm not here for dinner, Owen. I'm here to retire you." Luke stood up, sipping a glass of red wine. He looked annoyingly calm. "Put the gun down, Ben. You're outgunned 12-2. Even with your pet ninja, you can't win this." "It's not 12-2, Allison said, her voice echoing in the large room. "It's 12-1. Ben doesn't kill for money. I do." "Ah, the famous ghost," Owen Parker chuckled, the sound like dry leaves scraping together. "I tried to hire you once. You were too expensive. Luke here was affordable." "You sold your loyalty for a discount?" Ben asked Luke, his voice thick with betrayal. "I sold it for a future," Luke snapped, his composure cracking. "You were going soft, Ben. The nanny, the kids. You were turning the organization into a daycare. The commission needed a leader, not a father." "So you tried to kill my children," Ben roared. "Collateral damage," Luke shrugged. "Necessary for the evolution of the business." Ben pulled the trigger. Click. Nothing happened. Ben stared at his gun in shock. "Jammer," Luke smiled, pulling a small remote from his pocket. "Electronic firing pins are so unreliable in high-tech environments. We scrambled the signals in the room. Your fancy guns are useless." Luke drew a revolver. Old school, mechanical, reliable. "This, however, works fine." He aimed at Ben. "Goodbye, brother." But before Luke could fire, a knife buried itself in his wrist. Allison hadn't relied on a gun. She had thrown one of her karambits with terrifying precision. Luke screamed, dropping the revolver. "Kill them!" Owen shrieked. The 12 mercenaries raised their rifles, but they didn't fire, because the lights went out. Total pitch blackness. Allison hadn't just disarmed the claymore at the door, she had rigged it to the room's main breaker. "Ben, get down!" Allison's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Chaos erupted. Muzzle flashes lit up the room like a strobe light, revealing brief, horrific vignettes of violence. Flash. Allison dropping from the ceiling fixture onto a guard. Flash. Ben tackling a mercenary, using the man's own rifle as a club. Flash. Luke crawling toward his fallen revolver. Ben didn't fight the guards. He left them to the ghost. He moved through the darkness toward the head of the table. He moved toward Owen. He found the old man by the sound of the hissing oxygen tank. "Please," Owen whimpered in the dark. "I have money. Billions." "Keep it," Ben growled. He grabbed the oxygen tank and ripped the valve off. The gas hissed loudly. Ben struck a match he found on the table, a cigar match, long and elegant. "Retirement looks hot this time of year," Ben whispered. He dropped the match. The oxygen ignited. It wasn't an explosion, but a sudden, violent flare that set the tablecloth and curtains ablaze. The fire suppression system kicked in, raining water down on the chaos, turning the room into a slippery, smoky hellscape. Ben turned. In the flickering firelight, he saw Luke standing up. He had the revolver in his left hand now. He was aiming at Allison, who was engaged with the last two guards. "No!" Ben screamed. He didn't think. He didn't calculate. He lunged. He hit Luke just as the gun went off. The bullet tore through Ben's shoulder, spinning him around, but his momentum carried him forward. He tackled Luke, crashing through the floor-to-ceiling window. Glass shattered. Wind roared. They fell onto the balcony, rolling in the shards. Luke was younger, faster, but Ben was fighting for something Luke couldn't understand. Ben was fighting for a future. Luke tried to bring the gun around. Ben grabbed his wrist, slamming it against the concrete railing. The gun clattered over the edge, falling 40 stories to the street below. Luke looked at Ben, his eyes wide with fear. He was dangling halfway over the railing. "Ben, pull me up!" Luke begged. "We're family!" Ben looked at the man he had trusted with his life. He looked at the blood on his own shirt. He thought of Caleb and Emily hiding in a cellar. "My family is waiting for me," Ben said softly. He let go. Luke Adams fell silently into the night. Ben slumped against the railing, clutching his bleeding shoulder. The door to the balcony opened. Allison stepped out. She was battered, bruised, and soaking wet. But she was alive. She walked over to him, kneeling in the glass. "Is it done?" she asked. Ben looked at the empty railing, then at her. "It's done." Sirens wailed in the distance. The police were coming. "We need to go," Allison said, helping him up. "Where?" Ben asked, wincing. "Home," she said, "wherever that is." The island didn't have a name on most maps. It was a small speck of sand and palm trees in the South Pacific, owned by a shell corporation that couldn't be traced. Ben sat on the porch of a beach house, watching the sunset. His shoulder still ached when it rained, but the physical therapy was helping. Down on the beach, Caleb and Emily were building a sandcastle. They were laughing, a sound Ben hadn't heard enough of in the old life. Allison walked out of the house, carrying 2 cold beers. She wore a simple sundress, her hair loose. The tactical gear was gone, locked away in a crate in the basement. She handed him a beer and sat next to him. "Evan called," she said, watching the waves. "The commissioners disbanded. The territories are split. It's quiet." "Quiet is good," Ben said. "He also said there's a contract out," she added casually. Ben stiffened. "On me?" "No," she smiled, a mischievous glint in her eye. "On a ghost who dismantled a syndicate in one night. They say she's a myth, a demon." "Let them talk," Ben said, taking a sip. "Demons don't exist. Only angels." He looked at her, really looked at her. For months they had danced around the edges of what they were. Employer and employee. Soldier and commander. Survivors. "You never answered my question," Ben said. "Which one?" "That night in the van. I asked who you were." Allison looked down at her hands. Hands that could kill a man in 3 seconds, now holding a condensation-slicked bottle. "I was a weapon, Ben, for a long time. I didn't have a name, just a call sign. I thought that was all I was good for. And now?" She looked at the twins, running in the surf. "Now, I think I'm just Allison." Ben reached out and took her hand. Her skin was warm, the calluses familiar against his palm. "Allison fits you," he said. She leaned her head on his shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of everything they had survived. The bullets, the blood, the betrayal. "They're going to need dinner soon," she murmured. "I'll cook," Ben said. "I make a terrible grilled cheese." "I know," she laughed. "I've seen you try." Stick to running empires, Mr. Carter. Leave the logistics to me. Ben smiled. He leaned over and kissed her. It wasn't desperate like the one in the cabin. It was slow, gentle, promising a tomorrow that didn't involve gunfire. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. The old world was dead, buried under the rubble of the Parker Institute. In this new world, there were no mafia bosses, no assassins, just a man, a woman, and 2 children building castles in the sand, protected by the strongest shield of all. A family forged in fire. So, what do you think? Did Allison make the right choice, saving the man she was hired to kill, or should she have finished the job and walked away rich? Love in the criminal underworld is rarely clean, and, as Ben Carter learned, sometimes the person you trust the least is the only one who can save you. If you enjoyed this twist-filled saga of betrayal, action and romance, smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. And let me know in the comments, if you were in Ben's shoes, would you have forgiven Luke, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.